The armor had not moved in 43 years. That was the first thing the palace archivist told Marcus Vel when he arrived at the throne of Vel Sareth. Not hello, not welcome, not the customary Sareth greeting of palm to chest that he had practiced on the transit shuttle for 3 hours. Just that flat, somewhat accusatory statement, delivered to a point somewhere above his left shoulder, as though the archivist was informing the ceiling of a minor bureaucratic disappointment. 43 years, Marcus said. 43 years, 7 months, and 12 days, the archivist corrected. Her name was Doven, and she was very old, and she had clearly spent most of those years being correct about things. The Keth Solara has not moved since the night of the reclamation. It does not move for ceremony. It does not move for prayer. It does not move for the high wardens who come twice a decade to attempt it. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were the deep silver violet of polished storm glass. It will certainly not move for a human cultural liaison who has been on Sareth soil for approximately 4 hours. 6 hours, Marcus said. I was delayed at the landing port. Doven said nothing, which was, he was beginning to understand, her version of a very eloquent response. He had come to the Vel Sareth Royal Palace as part of the Accord exchange program, one of 47 humans posted across the Sareth Dominion to facilitate the first decade of formal diplomatic integration. His assignment was cultural documentation, attend ceremonies, observe traditions, compile reference materials that would help both species stop accidentally offending each other at trade summits. It was unglamorous work, and Marcus was very good at it. He was 31, patient, genuinely curious about things other people found dull, and he had been told he had the rare gift of watching carefully without making people feel watched. What he had not been told was that the Princess of Vel Sareth would decide, on the morning of his 3rd day, that he was funny. He met her in the document archives, which was where he spent most of his time. The palace was enormous, a layered mountain city of white stone and deep copperwood, terraced up the side of the Vel Sareth peak, its highest halls perpetually mist-shrouded and cool. The archive occupied the 4th terrace, and it smelled of preserved reed paper and something faintly mineral, like a cave near running water. Marcus was cross-referencing ceremonial registers, trying to understand the difference between a first-tier morning feast and a second-tier morning feast, which apparently mattered enormously to everyone except him, when a voice said, behind him, "You are reading that upside down." He turned. She was standing at the end of the archive shelf, holding a stack of registers against her chest, and watching him with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite succeeding. She was tall. Most Sareth were taller than him by several inches, and she had a few more on top of that, with the characteristic pale silver skin of the high-altitude Sareth lines, hair the deep blue-black of a moonless sky, and the faint luminous markings at her temples and jaw that on Sareth meant lineage. Not rank, he had learned. Lineage, the bloodline markers that emerged at adolescence and deepened throughout life. The markers on her face were fully developed, which meant she was an adult, and they were unusually complex in their branching, which meant she was old family. Old family on Sareth meant the ruling line. "I know," he said. "The binding is inverted. The text reads left to right, but the register is meant to be read from back to front. I was trying to understand the logic before I corrected for it." He paused. "You are Princess Aelith." "I am," she said. She looked at him with a new quality of attention, as though she was recalibrating a small expectation. Most humans panic when they first see the lineage marks. "I read about them on the transit shuttle," he said. "Thoroughly. I had 6 hours." She set the registers on the table across from his and sat down, which surprised him, because he had been briefed that the royal family did not generally sit with staff liaisons in archive rooms. She pulled one of his open registers toward her, looked at it for a moment, then turned it around and pushed it back. "First-tier mourning is for bloodline loss," she said, Second tier is for line of service loss. The food is different. The candle colors are different. The number of mourners permitted differs by a factor of 4. You will not be able to distinguish them by observation alone because they are emotionally identical from the outside. She tilted her head. Why do you want to know? So I don't attend the wrong one and serve as an accidental disruption to someone's grief. She looked at him again with that same recalibrating expression. That is a more careful reason than I expected. What did you expect? Curiosity about spectacle, she said. Most of the exchange liaisons are curious about our customs in the way that people are curious about unusual animals. They want to see the thing, not understand it. I'm curious about both, he said, but I'd rather understand it first. Aelith of the House Vel Sareth, heir to the Dominion throne, regarded him for a long moment across the archive table. Then something shifted in her expression, not a smile, not quite, but something adjacent to one. A private decision. Come with me, she said. I want to show you something. He should have been more suspicious of the phrasing. The Hall of Ancestors occupied the second highest terrace of the palace, reached by a staircase of white stone so old that each step had been worn into a shallow concavity by centuries of feet. The hall itself was long and high-ceilinged and cold, lit by the pale blue banked lights that the Sareth used in spaces they considered sacred, not for religious reasons, as Marcus had initially assumed, but because the color fell within the range that the Sareth retinal system registered as reverent. The biology made the ceremony, not the other way around. He had found that fascinating when he read it. The armor was at the far end of the hall. He understood immediately why the archivist had felt the need to announce it. It was not large, and it was not decorated in the theatrical way that human ceremonial armor tended to be, no gilding, no dramatic crest, no symbolic engraving that announced its importance. It was spare, functional. Made of a material he didn't recognize, a deep gray silver that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the blue light around it, with subtle articulations at the joints that suggested it had been built for movement rather than display. It stood on a low stone dais in an open case that had no lock, which, he suspected, was its own kind of statement. No one had ever needed to lock it because no one it hadn't chosen had ever been able to put it on. Beside it on a narrow shelf sat a pair of gauntlets, also gray-silver, also utterly still. The Keth Solara, Aelith said. Sacred ancestral armor, Marcus said. You read about that on the shuttle as well. The archivist told me when I arrived. She was very emphatic about the 43 years. Aelith walked to the armor with the ease of someone who had stood in this room thousands of times, which she probably had. She stopped in front of it and looked at it with an expression Marcus couldn't entirely parse, not reverence exactly, something more complicated. It was my grandmother's, she said. Before that, her grandfather's. Before that, 6 generations of the ruling line going back to the founding reclamation. The Keth Solara bonds to its wearer. Not permanently, it can be set aside and it will wait. But it responds only to those it recognizes as worthy by the Sareth measure of worthiness, which is not reducible to rank or bloodline. She paused. My grandmother was the last worthy wearer. She set it aside the night she abdicated. It has not responded to anyone since. Marcus stood a respectful distance from the dais and looked at the armor. Not even you. Not even me, she said, with a dryness that had something else underneath it. I have tried. My mother tried before she was crowned, and the Keth Solara was present for her coronation only as an object, not as a participant. The High Wardens have tried, at great ceremony and in the proper season, and with the correct ritual preparation. She turned to look at him with the expression he was beginning to recognize as her humor operating below the surface. It is the single most embarrassing, ongoing situation in the palace, and we have collectively agreed not to speak of it in formal company. What does it feel like, Marcus asked, when it doesn't respond? She was quiet for a moment, Like reaching for something warm and finding stone, she said. Then, as though she'd said more than she intended, but it is an object. Objects do not owe us responses. There was a silence that had some weight to it. Marcus looked at the armor, then at the empty hall, then back at her. "Is there a reason you brought me here?" he asked. Alith of Vel Sareth looked at the human cultural liaison standing in her hall of ancestors, with his slightly too careful posture and his transit shuttle education, and his genuine question that she had not been asked by a single person in the 7 years since she'd tried the armor herself and found nothing. And she made, in retrospect, an impulsive decision. "I want to see what happens," she said. He looked at her. "What happens when?" "When a human tries it." She said it with the lightness of someone proposing a small experiment, a curiosity, a minor diversion to break the tedium of a long diplomatic week. "You said you want to understand our customs, not merely observe them. This is a custom. The armor is not dangerous to handle. It simply will not respond to someone unworthy. Nothing will happen, but the attempt would be documentable." He studied her for a moment in a way that she had already noticed about him. The quality of his attention was different from the other humans she had met. He wasn't looking at her with the surface curiosity that processed her as an alien spectacle. He was actually reading the room. "This is a joke," he said. She held his gaze. "It is a minor anthropological experiment. You want to be able to tell someone later that you had a human try on the sacred armor." The not-quite smile showed at the corner of her mouth. "I want to document the experience for cultural reference purposes." Marcus Vel looked at the Keth Solara on its dais. He looked at the princess. He was aware that he was being used as the comic premise of a story she planned to tell, and he was also aware that he didn't particularly mind, and he was also aware, underneath that, of something he couldn't name, a low pull toward the armor that he was reasonably sure was just the power of suggestion in a very atmospheric room. "All right," he said, "how do you put it on?" "The gauntlets first," she told him. The tradition was gauntlets first, then the breastplate, then the pauldrons, then the helm. Each piece required lifting from the dais with both hands and stating intention, not a formal phrase, just honest intention. The armor had never responded to ritual words, only to something the Sareth considered harder to fake. Marcus picked up the right gauntlet with both hands. It was heavier than it looked, considerably heavier. The material had a texture he couldn't describe, not cold, not warm, not smooth, not rough. Present was the word that arrived in his mind, which wasn't a property he had previously assigned to metal. He held it, aware that Alith was watching with the patient amusement of someone waiting for the punchline. He stated his intention. He stated it honestly because it was the only way he knew how to state anything. "I'm here to understand, not to perform. I don't need the armor to prove something. I just want to see what it is." He put the gauntlet on. The hall went silent in a way that a hall that was already silent shouldn't be able to go more silent. And then the gauntlet closed. Not snapped shut, closed, the way a hand closes when it finds something it has been looking for. The articulation settled against his knuckles and his palm and the back of his hand with a precision that was not mechanical. It breathed, was the word his body offered him, which was also not a property he had previously assigned to metal. Alith said nothing. He picked up the left gauntlet. The breastplate took 2 of them to lift. She hadn't planned on that, had assumed she would be standing at a safe and amused distance, while he fumbled with equipment designed for a Sareth frame. But when he reached for the breastplate, it was clear he couldn't manage it alone, and she found herself moving forward without thinking and taking the other side, and their hands were 3 inches apart on the cold weight of the Keth Solara's chestpiece, and she was very aware that the armor was warm. It had never been warm before. She had run her hands along its surface hundreds of times in this room, sometimes in private, sometimes in ceremony, and it had always been the temperature of old stone in a high-altitude hall. The first time she had tried to wear it, she had been 16, and she had lifted the right gauntlet exactly the way the ceremony master showed her, and held it with her full intention directed at it, and it had been so cold and so entirely still that she had understood immediately. She had set it down with great care, so the ceremony master would not see her hands shaking. But under Marcus Vell's hands it was producing warmth, not dramatically, not a burning glow like the old sagas described, just the warmth of a living thing that was paying attention. They lifted the breastplate together, and he held still while it settled over him. It should not have fit. He was human, different skeletal geometry, different proportions, different frame. The Keth Solara had been shaped for a Sarith body, but the armor adjusted. She watched it do so, and the sensation in her chest was something she did not have an immediate word for. "It's doing something," Marcus said. His voice was careful, not alarmed. Careful, the same quality of attention he had applied to the inverted register. "I can see that," she said. "Is this normal?" She looked up at him. She was 2 inches taller than he was without the armor. With the pauldron still on the dais, he was at eye level. "No," she said. "This is not normal. This has not happened in 43 years, 7 months, and 12 days. Something moved at the edges of the armor, along the joins and articulations, where the gray-silver met the gray-silver and was supposed to meet nothing else. A faint luminosity, not the same blue as the hall's sacred lighting, deeper, the color that existed at the bottom of the Sarith night sky below the stars before dawn. "Should I stop?" Marcus asked. She looked at the armor. She looked at his face, steady, watching, present. She thought about the joke she had been intending to tell, and the audience she had been imagining, and the particular flavor of amusement she had been storing up. "No," she said, "put on the pauldrons." She helped him with those too. And the helm she lifted herself, carried to him with both hands, and set on his head with a care she hadn't planned. The helm closed around him the way the gauntlets had, complete, decisive. The luminosity that had been tracing the joins deepened and spread, and for one moment the Keth Solara blazed in the cold hall with the light that, she had read this in her grandmother's journals, had never expected to see it. The sagas called the asterisk Vel Sara, asterisk the recognition light, the proof of worthiness witnessed. Then it gentled, settled. The light became a steady, quiet glow along the armor's edges and joints, and Marcus Vell stood in her hall of ancestors in her grandmother's armor that had waited 43 years and was still. The hall was utterly silent. Then he said, "Should I be concerned about the glowing?" A sound came out of Aelith's throat that she had not planned. Not a laugh. A Sarith princess did not laugh in the hall of ancestors at a human in sacred armor, but something adjacent to one, pressed closed before it fully arrived. "The Vel Sara," she said, "the recognition light." Her voice came out differently than she intended, quieter. "It means the armor has judged you worthy." "Of what?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. She was doing something she almost never did. She was looking at a situation she had thought she understood and finding that she had been wrong. And instead of the irritation that usually accompanied that discovery, she was experiencing something else. Something that moved through her chest the way the Vel Sara moved along the armor's edges. Slow, certain, and not ready to be named yet. "I don't entirely know," she said. "No one alive has seen it respond. The texts disagree on what it means." "Then I suppose we'll find out," Marcus said, in the voice of a man who found that acceptable. They spent the next 2 hours in the hall. This had not been the plan. The plan had been a brief demonstration, a politely confused human, an unchanged armor, and a story to tell. Instead they sat on the steps of the dais, him still in the armor, which didn't seem to want to be removed yet, or rather seemed to be waiting for something, while Aelith went through the hall and pulled texts from the archive alcoves along the side walls that she had not touched in years. She read aloud. He listened with the particular quality of his listening, which she was becoming more conscious of the longer they spent in the same room. The oldest text said the Keth Solara recognized not bloodline or rank or formal worthiness, but Velona asterisk, a Sarath concept that translated poorly, as the best Sarath concepts did. The closest approximation in the Accord's diplomatic standard was asterisk honest presence, asterisk the quality of showing up as entirely what one was, without performance or concealment, without the layer of managed impression that most people maintained between themselves and the world. The armor, according to the oldest record keepers, was allergic to performance. It had refused 3 high kings in a row during the Middle Period because, the text suggested, those high kings had been performing kingship rather than simply being what they were. Honest presence, Marcus repeated. As translated, Aelith said, the original Sarath is asterisk Velona, which carries additional weight, something closer to the willingness to be known. She looked at the glowing joins along his armor. You were honest about your intention when you lifted the gauntlet. I just said what was true, he said. Most people don't, she said. He looked at her, with the full weight of his attention for a moment. She had spent her whole life managing what she allowed people to see of her, because she was the princess and the heir and the one who would wear the crown after her mother, and the crown required a version of her that was presentable at all times. She was not accustomed to being looked at the way Marcus Vel looked at things, with the specific patience that said, I'm not trying to conclude anything about you. I'm trying to understand you. It was an uncomfortable feeling, not unpleasantly so. Can you move? She asked to redirect. He stood. The armor moved with him the way the text said it would, not like wearing armor, but like wearing a second self. He took a few steps. The luminosity shifted as he moved, and she noticed that it pulsed faintly in a rhythm she recognized after a moment as his heartbeat. It's warm, he said, on the inside. The Keth Solara regulates temperature for its wearer, she said. One of my grandmother's journals mentions that she wore it through the siege of the northern pass and was never cold, 40 days at altitude in winter. He looked down at the breastplate. What are the secret powers? She blinked. I'm sorry. In the title, he paused. I assume you have some story you've been telling people. I'm the human who tried the armor as a joke. That must have been the title of the story. So what were the secret powers you were expecting not to happen? Aelith of Vel Sarath, heir to the Dominion throne, looked at the human in her grandmother's armor and felt something she was not accustomed to feeling. She felt caught. The Vel Sara activates a set of secondary functions in the armor, she said after a moment. Functions that have not been accessible since my grandmother last wore it. The breastplate houses a Kethona asterisk, a resonance core. In active state, it generates a protection field extending approximately 3 meters from the wearer. In my grandmother's active service, it extended to 5. The stronger the Velona of the wearer, the wider the field. She paused. The texts also describe a secondary effect that the armor has produced exactly 3 times in recorded history, in times of great need, a clarity effect. The wearer becomes capable of perceiving things that are happening at a remove, beyond the range of ordinary sight or sense. The oldest texts call it Vel Sara Kethona asterisk, the recognition light that knows. No one alive has seen it. Most of the court considers it legend. Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then, how do you test for it? I believe, Aelith said slowly, that it manifests on its own, in response to genuine need. She looked at him. It has never been triggered by a test. So the honest answer is, we don't know. The honest answer, she agreed, is that I brought a human to the Hall of Ancestors expecting nothing to happen, and instead my grandmother's armor responded to him with full Vel Sara after 43 years, and I am now sitting on archive steps reading aloud from texts I have not looked at since I was 16, and I do not know what happens next. The silence that followed was different from the one at the beginning, fuller. That's a better story, Marcus said. Then what? Then the joke. She looked at him. The light along the armor's edges was steady and warm in the high cold hall. She thought about the person she had been planning to tell the joke to, her senior court advisor, who would have found it harmlessly entertaining. And she thought about this moment, which was not harmlessly anything. "Yes," she said quietly, "it is a better story." The armor came off an hour later, which seemed to be when it decided the visit was complete. It did not make this decision dramatically. The luminosity simply faded gently over a few minutes and the articulations relaxed, and Marcus was able to remove each piece in the reverse order. He set the helm down last. His hands were still warm from the inside of the gauntlets. Aelith documented the entire thing in her personal record archive, which was different from the palace's official record system and which she trusted more. She wrote a clean account. The time, the sequence, the behavior of each piece, the Vel Sara, the warmth of the material, the heartbeat in the luminosity. She wrote the word *Velona* and its translation, and she was aware that she was describing the armor but also describing him. She did not note that part. When they left the Hall of Ancestors and walked back down the long white staircase to the fourth terrace, the palace had begun its afternoon quiet. The period between the midday session and the evening court when the terraces emptied, and the halls settled into a particular stillness that she had always preferred to the busy hours. It felt, she noticed, like the empty hours that the old texts named, when the palace was between its versions of itself. "Will you tell the court?" Marcus asked. She thought about it as they walked. "Not immediately," she said. "They will want to draw conclusions I'm not ready to have drawn yet." "What conclusions?" "What the Velona means," she said. "Whether the armor's response constitutes a political statement, whether a human being recognized by the Keth Solara changes anything about the Accord's status, or the exchange program, or my mother's court's opinion of the integration." She paused. "Everyone will want it to mean something political before we've had time to understand what it actually means." "And what do you think it means?" he asked. They had stopped at the edge of the fourth terrace, the wide stone balcony that overlooked the lower city and the mountain slope below, pale in the afternoon light, the mist pulling back from the peak for the first time since his arrival. The view was extraordinary and he had clearly just noticed it. "I think it means the armor found what it was looking for," she said. "I think the Keth Solara is old enough and particular enough to simply have an opinion, and it expressed it." She looked out at the city. "I think the Velona is real, and it is rare, and you have it." "I'm a cultural liaison," he said. "Yes," she said. "And you read registers upside down to understand the logic before you correct for it. And you learned the morning feast tears so you wouldn't accidentally disrupt someone's grief. And you told the armor honestly that you wanted to understand and not to perform, which is what the armor has been waiting for someone to say since the night my grandmother set it aside." She turned to look at him. "What you are and what you do are the same thing. That is Velona." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the city and then at her. The afternoon light was warmer than the hall, and in it, his face was readable in a way that the blue sacred lighting had made harder. "What does it mean for you?" he asked. "Not politically, for you." It was the second time in 2 hours that he had asked her a question she didn't have a prepared answer to. She was beginning to understand that this was a characteristic of his, not an accident. "I've been trying to carry this position with enough worth to deserve it," she said. "Not the armor, the throne. My mother is the finest ruler the Sarith Dominion has had in 3 generations, and I know that, and I know I will be compared to her and found lacking in the early years no matter what I do, and the armor not responding has been." She stopped. She had not said this to anyone. She had not planned to say it now. "It has been a quiet confirmation of what I have feared." "That you're not enough," he said. "That I don't have Velona," she said. "That whatever my grandmother was, I am a lesser version." He turned to face her fully. "The armor responded when I lifted the gauntlet," he said. "You lifted the breastplate with me. Your hands were on it for the same amount of time as mine. She had not thought about this. "The warmth started before I lifted the breastplate," he said carefully, "but it continued with both of us touching it, and when you set the helm on my head, the Vel Sara was at its strongest." He held her gaze. "I'm not a Sarath cultural expert, but I read a lot on the shuttle, and the texts you read aloud today said the recognition light witnesses worthiness, not the worthiness of the wearer alone. In the old siege accounts, it extended to the people around the wearer." The silence on the balcony was the stillness of the empty hours around them. "You are saying," Aelith said slowly, "that the Vel Sara did not exclude me." "I'm saying it brightened when you touched it," he said. "I noticed." She looked at him for a long time, the afternoon light on his face, his careful, honest attention. "You noticed," she said. "I notice things," he said. "That's the job." She looked away at the city below because the alternative was continuing to look at him, and she needed a moment to decide what to do with what was happening in her chest. Not a political calculation, not an assessment of usefulness or diplomatic significance, something simpler and more inconvenient. "You will be here for the full term of the exchange program," she said. 18 months. "Assuming my documentation doesn't get me reassigned," he said. "It won't," she said. Then, aware of how certain she'd sounded, "The archive needs someone who reads the registers properly." "Even upside down," he said. The not-quite smile arrived fully this time. She didn't press it back. She let it be there, in the afternoon light on the terrace, in the quiet of the empty hours with the city spread below them. "Even upside down," she said. They returned to the hall on the following morning. This was also not the plan. Aelith had spent the night reviewing her documentation notes, telling herself that what she was doing was methodical and professional, which was true, and also telling herself that she was not thinking about the warmth of the armor under both their hands, which was less true. She had written 7 pages of clear, orderly notes, and then sat for 20 minutes looking at the word *Velona*, and its translation before she decided she had more to read and went back to the hall. Marcus was already there. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall beside the archive alcove, 3 texts open across his knees, making notes on his tablet. He looked up when she came in. She stopped. "I didn't know you were going to be here," she said. "I didn't know you were going to be here," he said. A brief shared silence. Then she sat down on the steps of the dais, not beside him, a respectful distance, and opened the text she had brought. They worked in the same room for 2 hours without planning to. She read. He read. Occasionally one of them said something about what they had found and the other responded, and the conversation built in the quiet intervals the way conversations do when neither person is performing them. She found in the oldest version of the reclamation records a passage about the armor's first recognized wearer, a woman named Vel Arath, the founding ancestor who had not been born to the ruling line but had been chosen by the Keth Solara when the armor was newly forged. The passage was brief and plain-worded in the style of the first chronicle. She was not noble. She was honest. The armor did not care about the difference. "Read this," she said, and crossed the hall and handed him the text. He read it, then he looked up at her. "That's interesting." "The armor chose a commoner," she said, "in the founding year, before the Vel Sarath ruling house existed." "The ruling house existed because the armor chose her," he said. "The choice came first." She had read this passage before. She had read it many times in the context of ancestry and lineage and the long history of the Sarath throne. She had never read it as the thing it was, an account of an armor that had not cared about rank, only Velona. She sat down on the floor, closer to him now, with the text between them, and they read the first chronicle together, and the morning passed in a way that she would remember afterward as both ordinary and unlike anything that had happened before it. When they left, his hand brushed hers in the doorway, not by accident, she thought, but not by design either. By the slight compression of the passage and the particular way that 2 people walk when they are thinking about the same thing. His fingers touched the back of her hand for a moment. He didn't say anything about it. Neither did she. But she thought about it for the rest of the day. The court found out about the armor within 2 days. The palace had no true secrets. It was too old, too inhabited, too densely staffed, and the Hall of Ancestors had a night warden who had been in the position for 31 years, and who wrote daily reports to the court archive, and who noted with admirable precision that the Keth Solara had produced luminosity consistent with the Vel Sara on the afternoon of the human liaison's 3rd day, duration approximately 2 hours, observed by the Princess Aelith and no other court member. The court archive routed the report to the senior advisor, who routed it to the Minister of Ancestral Protocol, who brought it to Aelith's mother on the morning of the 4th day with the careful energy of someone who was not sure whether this was a crisis or not. Queen Marin of Vel Sareth heard the report and sent everyone out of the room. Then she sent for Aelith. The private audience room was smaller than the throne hall and furnished with the careful simplicity that her mother preferred: plain stone, good light, no decoration except the family chronicle cloth that had hung on the south wall for 6 generations. Aelith had sat in this room for most of the significant conversations of her life. Her mother looked at her across the plain stone table and said, "Tell me what happened." Aelith told her, completely, without editing. She had made a private rule when she was young that she would not lie to her mother in this room, and she had never broken it. She described the joke she had intended, and the gauntlet closing, and the warmth, and the 2 hours of texts, and what Marcus had said on the balcony. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was one of the qualities that made her an extraordinary ruler. When Aelith finished, the queen was quiet for a long time. "He said the Vel Sora brightened when you touched the breastplate," she said. "Yes. Do you believe it?" "I believe he noticed it," Aelith said. "He notices things carefully. He doesn't say things for effect." Her mother looked at the chronicle cloth. "The court is going to want this interpreted," she said. "A human recognized by the Keth Solara during the 1st year of the Accord. The protocol advisors will want it to be a political sign. The isolationists will want it to be an aberration. The old family members will want it examined for precedent." She paused. "What do you want it to be?" "I want it to be what it is," Aelith said. "I don't want to conclude before I understand." Her mother looked at her with an expression that Aelith could not always read, which was her mother's highest register, the one she used when she was feeling something she had not decided whether to show. "You sound different when you talk about him," she said. Aelith said nothing. "That is not a criticism," her mother said. "That is an observation." Marcus was summoned to the private audience room 3 hours later. He came without apparent anxiety, which Aelith suspected was either a performance or simply his natural state, and she was fairly certain at this point that it was simply his natural state. He sat across from Queen Marin with the posture of someone who understood the room was significant and was treating it accordingly, but was not attempting to manage his impression of it. The Queen asked him to describe what happened. He did. His account matched Aelith's in every specific detail which her mother would have noticed. "The armor responded to you," the Queen said at the end. "How did that feel?" He thought about the question honestly, which Aelith had noticed was his habit with every question. "Like being seen by something that had been waiting to look," he said. "I don't have better language for it. It wasn't frightening. It was," he paused, "serious, in the way that an honest conversation is serious, not heavy but real." The Queen looked at him steadily. "My daughter believed she lacked the Velona for the Keth Solara to respond to her." Marcus glanced at Aelith, brief and careful. "I know, she told me." "And you said the armor brightened when she touched it." "Yes." "Why did you tell her that?" He met the Queen's eyes. "Because it was true and she needed to know it." The Queen was quiet for a moment, not because it was diplomatic. "If I'd been calculating diplomatically," he said, "I would have let it go. It wasn't the moment for a diplomatic observation. It was the moment for an honest one. Marin of Vel Sareth, who had spent 30 years on a throne and had learned in that time to read the difference between a person who was honest and a person who was performing honesty, looked at Marcus Vel for a long moment. Then she looked at her daughter. "The court is going to make this complicated," she said to both of them. "Yes," Aelith said. "The Accord advisors will want interpretive frameworks. The ancestral houses will want precedent studies. The integration opposition will want it classified as anomalous." "Yes," Aelith said again. "None of that needs to happen today," her mother said. She looked at the chronicle cloth. "The Vel Sora last appeared in this palace the night your grandmother abdicated. She had worn the Keth Solara for 38 years, and she set it down knowing it would not be taken up again until the person it was waiting for arrived." The Queen's voice was level and careful. She wrote about it in the private journals. She said the armor had patience in it, that it would wait as long as it needed to. She looked at Marcus. She did not say the person it was waiting for would be Sareth. The room held that in its stillness for a moment. "I would like to continue my documentation work," Marcus said, "if that's acceptable." "The archive needs someone who reads registers properly," Aelith said. He looked at her. She met his eyes and did not look away. "Even upside down," he said. Her mother, Queen Marin, who was a person of exceptional dignity and composure, pressed her lips together in a way that was very close to what, on a person with different responsibilities, would have been a smile. She stood, which ended the audience, and both of them rose. "The armor stays in the hall," she said. "It has waited this long. It can wait a little longer to be complicated about." She walked to the door, paused. "Mr. Vel, the winter ceremony is in 3 months. It is the only ceremony in the Sareth calendar that requires the Keth Solara to be present in an active state, not worn present. We have not had an active state for 43 years. She did not look at him. "You should read about it, in your archives." She left. The next morning her senior court advisor, a woman named Death Varel who had served 3 rulers, and who had the particular weariness of someone who had seen every kind of political complication exactly twice before, came to her study with the report and said, "The Hall Warden's account has already reached the Ancestral Protocol Council." "I expected it would," Aelith said. "The Council wants a formal interpretation session. Tell them I am reviewing the texts and will provide a position when I have one." Death Varel looked at her with the expression that meant she was about to say something candid. "They will not wait indefinitely." "I know, I will be faster than indefinitely." Aelith looked at the window. "The Vel Sora has not appeared in this palace in 43 years. If they would like to formalize that into a 44th, they are welcome to bring the interpretive framework to me directly." Death Varel said nothing for a moment. Then, carefully, "You are protecting the human liaison." "I am protecting the event," Aelith said. "They are not the same thing, and I would appreciate the distinction being maintained." Which was true, and also not the whole truth. The days that followed were both ordinary and not. Marcus documented. He attended the archive. He attended minor ceremonies with his tablet and his careful attention, and his habit of asking one more question than people expected. He learned the difference between the first-tier and the second-tier morning feast, attended both, and managed not to disrupt anyone's grief. He attended the third terrace market that happened on every 6th day of the Sareth week, and tried the fermented grain drink that was traditional, and was very careful about his expression afterward. The drink was deeply, aggressively unpleasant in a way that was clearly acquired over generations, and the vendor watched him with the particular attention of someone waiting for the human to fail the test. He didn't fail it. He didn't succeed at it either, but he set the cup down with a nod of genuine respect for the depth of the commitment to the flavor, and the vendor looked at him for a moment, and then, apparently, approved of him, because she gave him a second cup unprompted and stayed to explain what the grain was and how the fermentation worked, and what the drink was traditionally consumed to mark, which was the end of the autumn planting. He wrote 3 pages in his documentation log about the market. He also wrote, at the bottom, a note to himself. The Sarith receive honesty differently than I expected. They don't require you to pretend to like the thing. They require you to genuinely reckon with it. He thought about the armor, and Velona asterisk, and what it meant to genuinely reckon with something. He returned to the Hall of Ancestors 3 times in the weeks that followed. The first time he was alone and stood at the entrance and looked at the armor on its dais, which was still and gray-silver and warm-looking in the cool hall, and felt the same low pull he'd felt the first time, which he had not told anyone about, because he was not sure what it meant. He stood there for a while and let himself feel it. He was a person who believed in not running from the things he didn't understand yet, so he stood in the doorway of the Hall of Ancestors at mid-morning with the palace quiet around him and examined the sensation honestly. It wasn't a summons. It wasn't a compulsion. It was more like the feeling of arriving somewhere he'd been trying to describe without having visited it and finding that the description was right. He was also aware, honestly, that the pull had at least 2 components, and only one of them was the armor. He did not go in. He stood at the threshold for 10 minutes and then went back to the archive, where he read the 2nd volume of the ancestral record for 3 hours and found, in the 14th section, the passage about worthiness and time, and thought about it for longer than he planned to. The second time Aelith was there first, standing at the dais with her hands at her sides, looking at the armor with the complicated expression she wore when she didn't know she was being looked at. He stopped at the entrance and she heard him and turned, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then she said, "I put my hand on the breastplate." He waited. "It was warm," she said. "It's always been cold before, when I've tried to wear it cold and unyielding and still. Today it was warm." "What did you do?" he asked. "I stood there," she said. "I thought I tried to be what I am, not what I manage." She paused. "It was harder than I expected. I am very practiced at managing." "Did it respond?" he asked. "Not the way it responded to you," she said. "No luminosity, no Velsara, but—" she looked at her hand. "When I took my hand away, it was warm for a while after." Like it had recognized the question, if not the answer. He crossed the hall and stood beside her at the dais. Not close enough to be a statement, just present. The armor stood before them both, quiet and significant. "The text said worthiness in the Sarith measure isn't fixed," he said. "It's not a permanent state. It's something you carry differently at different times." "My grandmother wrote that," she said. "I had forgotten." "I read it in the archive last week," he said. "Section 14 of the 2nd volume of the Vel-Sarith ancestral record. You've been trying to test for it. The armor doesn't respond to tests." "It responded to you," she said. "I wasn't testing," he said. "I was being what I am." Which is a person who reads registers upside down and doesn't know how to perform things very well. She looked at him sideways with a not-quite smile. "You are extremely practiced at being what you are." "It's all I know how to do," he said. She looked at the armor. "I have spent 10 years learning what I should be," she said, "practicing the version of myself that fits the position. I don't know," she stopped. "I don't know what I am without it." "You sat on archive steps and read aloud for 2 hours, he said. "You told me the truth about what the armor not responding had felt like. You argued with the archivist's report before your mother even read it because you wanted the account to be accurate before anyone drew conclusions." He looked at her. "That's what you are. Without the position." The hall was very quiet. The blue sacred light moved faintly in the high windows. "You're still noticing things," she said. "That's the job," he said. She looked at him for a long time with an expression she wasn't managing. Something in her chest that had been careful and controlled for the better part of a week made a small movement, like the first giving way of a spring lock when the right key arrives. "Stay," she said, "not a command, not even really a request, something simpler, not just for the archive, stay." He looked at her steadily with the full quality of his attention, the kind that didn't process and conclude, but simply received. "I'm here for 18 months, he said. "After that," she said. The hall held the word between them. "You haven't told the court about the Vel Sara on the breastplate today," he said. "No," she said, she paused. "That was mine and yours if you want it." He did not look away. The armor stood before them, warm and quiet, waiting in the way old things that are patient wait, without urgency, without demand, certain of the eventual. "I want it," he said. The winter ceremony came in 3 months, as the Queen had said. The 2 months between the audience and the ceremony were a slow accumulation of small things. Marcus attended more ceremonies. He filed accurate reports. He learned 47 words in Old Sarith that had no standard translation, and kept them in a separate document that he labeled, with his characteristic plainness, asterisk words that need more time. He and Aelith met in the archive at irregular intervals, never planned, always apparently accidental, in the way that things become regular through repetition, until they are simply the shape of the week. She taught him the third-tier greeting, which was reserved for people of significant social distance, and which no human had used correctly without prompting before. He learned it in 2 attempts, which she did not mention to anyone. He asked her once, in the archive, over the first chronicle, whether she had decided what she wanted the armor's response to mean. She said, "I've decided I don't need it to mean anything to the court before it means something to me." He said, "And what does it mean to you?" She looked at the chronicle. "That some things recognize worth before the person carrying it does," she said. Then, quieter, "and that the right kind of attention, patient, honest attention, is not as common as it should be." He said nothing, but she looked up and found his eyes on her with the full quality of his watching, and she held it for a moment longer than the conversation required. In the weeks before the winter ceremony, the armor appeared in 2 official documents. The Ancestral Protocol Council released a formal position paper stating that the Vel Sara event required further study before any interpretive conclusion could be offered. The Integration Opposition published a counterpaper arguing that the armor's response was an anomaly with no diplomatic significance. Both papers were thorough, and both papers were, in Aelith's private assessment, beside the point. She filed her own position with the court archive. The Keth Solara responded to Velona. The Velona was genuine. The documents that resulted are yours to interpret. The event itself belongs to the archive and to the people who were present. It was the most she could say officially. It was not the most she knew. The winter ceremony came in 3 months, as the Queen had said. It was the oldest ceremony in the Sarith calendar, the marking of the longest night, the acknowledgement that darkness and cold were real and present, and that the people within them were also real and present, and that they had endured and would endure. The Keth Solara was carried in the ceremony's procession, not worn. An active armor carried openly was a statement of the Dominion's living line, of continuity, of the Velona in the ruling house reaching from past into present. The armor had not made the procession an active state in 43 years. It made the procession an active state this year. Marcus Vel walked at the left of the honor guard, not in the armor which was ceremonially carried by the appointed honor-bearers, but at the appropriate position for a court-recognized cultural documentarian of the 3rd tier, which was a rank he had been assigned 2 months after arriving, and which placed him in the procession's formal frame. He had a tablet. He was, technically, documenting. Aelith walked at the head of the procession, representing the ruling house in her mother's place, which was tradition for the 2nd year of an heir's formal adult service. She wore her court robes, which were deep blue and silver, and her hair was dressed in the formal style, and she looked like exactly what she was. As the procession passed through the Hall of Ancestors, The longest single corridor in the route, the most ceremonially weighted, the Keth Solara blazed. Not the subtle warmth of the private visits. The full Vel Sara, the deep sky light filling the hall from its edges, the recognition light that the sagas called asterisk witnessing, steady and certain and present. The honor-bearers held it and felt it, and the procession around it stilled for a moment before the ceremony master called the continuation. The court saw it, everyone in the hall saw it. Aelith did not look at Marcus. She kept her eyes forward, her posture correct, her expression serene in the way she had spent years learning. But she felt him watching, not with the surface attention that watched for things to record, but with the deep attention that knew her, that had learned her, that had noticed the warmth on the breastplate and held it private until she was ready. She walked the full length of the Hall of Ancestors in the Vel Sora's light, and she did not manage her expression for the last 20 steps, and the armor's light was warmest at the point where she passed closest to the dais where it had waited. In the procession log that Marcus filed the following morning, he noted, the Keth Solara produced full Vel Sora luminosity during the Hall of Ancestors transit, duration approximately 4 minutes. The recognition light was brightest during Princess Aelith's passage. His documentation was precise, accurate, and included one sentence that the court archive flagged as anomalous. In the opinion of the documenting cultural liaison, the armor was not witnessing the procession. It was witnessing her. The senior advisor did not know what to do with this and set it aside. The queen read it and did nothing except file it correctly. Aelith read it on the afternoon of the following day, sitting in the archive with an inverted register she hadn't opened, and held the tablet for a long time, and then set it down and went to find him. He was in the archive. He was reading something right side up which was unusual, and he looked up when she came in. She sat across from him the way she had the first day, the same table, the same winter light from the high windows. "You filed that in the official record," she said. "I file things accurately," he said. "That's the job." That was not a cold observation. "No," he agreed, "it wasn't." She looked at him across the table with the full weight of what had been accumulating for 3 months, carefully, honestly, in the Sareth measure, which required certainty before naming, and she let it be fully in her expression. "The Velona," she said, "the willingness to be known." "Yes," he said. "I have been practicing it," she said. "It's still difficult, but I think," she paused, "I think I am learning what I am without managing it." "I know," he said. "I've noticed." She looked at her hands on the table. The afternoon light was long and warm. "The armor is not going to stop being politically complicated," she said. "No," he said. "My mother's court is going to draw interpretations." "Yes." "The integration opposition is going to use it." "Almost certainly." "And you are going to be here for 18 months and then," she said, "there is a question." "There is a question," he agreed. She looked at him directly. "I am not practiced at this," she said, "at saying things before they are entirely certain, but I am trying to be honest." She held his gaze. "I would prefer the question to have a particular answer." He looked at her across the archive table, in the winter afternoon light, with the full quality of his attention that did not conclude but received. "I know," he said, "I noticed." The not-quite smile arrived on her face and stayed. Outside, on the 4th terrace, the mist had cleared entirely from the Vel Sareth peak, and the city below was bright in the winter light, and somewhere in the Hall of Ancestors above them, the Keth Solara sat in its open case on its low dais, warm and steady and patient, its long wait for now complete.